There's always something that's coming out that's the hottest, the greatest, the newest thing that's going to change everything. Well, AI is that. What I think really kind of gives the gravitas that AI really deserves. AI is probably the most important thing humanity has ever worked on. I think of it as something more profound than electricity or fire. Now that's coming from the CEO of Google, which is now Alphabet also. That's how big of an impact that AI is going to have on the world that we know today. The internet gave us access to information. AI and machine learning allows us to use information in a meaningful way that can impact our lives and our society. AI is more transformative than the internet. That's the only thing that today we can relate that to. AI will add $15.7 trillion to the global economy by 2030. 84% of executives say adopting AI is critical for competitive advantage. AI-driven companies will achieve 50% faster time to market for new services. Now, this is the one that blows my socks off. AI-powered support slashes response time by 99%. Global AI investments will exceed $500 billion by 2027. Now, this $500 billion is going to create AI systems within various organizations. 60% of that is going to be done by outsourced companies. They're not doing it themselves. They're going to a company that has credibility in doing it, services companies. So, and I'll even go as far as to say, if you're a professional, if you're a services company or consulting company or coach, you executive coach, whatever you do, if you're not incorporating the ability to implement an AI-based solution as part of your portfolio, you're going to be out of business in 3 years. That's just a fact. AI consulting firms grow 4 times faster than traditional services firms. Again, the opportunities there are unprecedented if you are a business-to-business or business-to-government company. So what's the problem here? Well, this is the problem, and it's also an opportunity. Most AI projects fail. That's the dirty secret. 85% of AI projects fail due to poor governance. Only 1 in 5 firms have any formal AI governance. 1 in 5, 20%. There's a lot of negatives associated with that: poor return on investment, and also legal exposure and an impact to brand reputation. AI is the wild, wild west. It really is. There's nothing governing it. There's no controls. There's no overarching body, that's guiding how to do it. There's no order or discipline associated with AI implementation. That is the root cause. It is the wild, wild west. Now, this is what's crazy. This is not the first time that we face this dilemma. We faced this dilemma in the 1970s, 80s, and early 90s when it came to large software development efforts. In the 80s and 90s, the government as well as industry, large industry, they wanted to reap the benefits of enterprise-wide software tools. And, they were throwing gazillions of dollars at it to get it done. And yet, 84% of those projects failed. 84%. That's shockingly similar to the success rate of today's AI implementation projects, which is 85. So the government stepped in and said, look, for national security purposes, we got to have some of these damn, enterprise-wide solutions working in the, in our Defense Department. So they've reached out to Carnegie Mellon Software Engineering Institute to create a framework. And what they did is they created the Capability Maturity Model, CMML, which ultimately became CMMI for integration. So they created a model that showed, how to assess your company and its maturity and in its ability to develop software. Let's see what happened to those early adopters. Now, they implemented this in 1987. They started having the ability to be appraised in the early 1990s. Those companies that committed to these globally accepted best practices, they had a ton of success. And here's just a couple of them. Booz Allen was doing $450 million in 1990 when they adopted CMMI. As the way that they do business in the IT integration world. And today they're 10.7 billion. Same way with Lockheed Martin, their software development unit. They were doing $250 million in software development in 1990, and now they're doing $11.8 billion in software development. Why? Because they captured that market share. They became known as the company that can deliver because of that. A company that I really like a lot was called Task. And they were about $75 million in 1990, and they were a very early adopter to CMMI, and they were doing about $1.6 billion about a decade later. Now just think of the growth there. And they were purchased by Northrop Grumman, and that's kind of when I knew them. But these are big companies. Let's look at some little companies. Let's look at companies that are around the $5 million, $7.5 million size. Let me throw out a couple of those. Infosys, they were $5 million in revenue when they adopted CMMI as their way of doing business. And that was in 1990, and today they're 18 billion. 18 billion from 5 million. TCS, Tata Consulting Services, they were 7.5 million when they adopted it in the early 1990s, and now they're 27 billion. Both of these companies, they have grown exponentially because of their credibility and their ability to deliver. When everybody else was struggling, they delivered, and they stood out in the crowd because they had these corporate credentials. AI is following the same path as the whole IT industry, software development industry, and CMMI. This time, it wasn't Carnegie Mellon that stepped up to the plate. It was ISO. ISO is the International Standards Organization, and what they do is they have bodies. They come together and they create industry best practices for different areas of industry. Their most famous one is ISO 9001, Quality Management System. For all of these different industries, they come up with best practices, just like what Carnegie Mellon did for the capability maturity model. They came up with globally accepted best practices on how to do a large-scale software development effort. So in December of 2023, less than 18 months ago, or right at 18 months ago, they created the first globally accepted standard body of best practices for AI management. They also created a credential. Instead of being CMMI level 3 appraisal or level 4 or level 5 appraisal, they've created the ISO 42001 AI management system certification. However, it's still in its infancy. It's still kind of in a pilot phase. There are less than 10 documented companies that have this certification right now. It will be years, just like it was for CMMI, before this is widely available, this credential. However, if you're in the ISO industry, which I am, the ISO certification group, there are workarounds. There are a few certification bodies that can offer a very, very, very similar credential. So instead of being ISO 42001 certified, some of these certification bodies, they can certify you compliant with ISO 42001. This much difference in nomenclature. You are certified compliant with the ISO 42001 standard, or you are ISO 42001 certified. Both are by accredited ISO organizations, and both of them are using the same standard. The only difference is that if you're ISO 42001 certified, you will ultimately, your credential will be tracked on iafsearchcert.org. If you are certified compliant with ISO 42001, your credential is tracked by the actual certifying body. So you'd have to provide the website. That is essentially the only difference. And then when more bodies become available to offer this ISO certification, guess what? If you want to convert that to a certification, all you need is an audit, and you're already compliant. You're already compliant. All you just need is the audit, and then they do the audit. Boom, you can convert that to an ISO certification. Should you choose? Should you see value in that? Why does this matter? Well, one, it'll help you get started. Actually, with the best practices. It's kind of like it's a how-to manual of how to effectively manage AI systems. That's the first thing. But then again, the second thing is it can help you stand out in the crowd. Now, what do I mean by that? In the United States alone, and again, this is data. This is a half decade ago. There was 31.7 million U.S. small businesses, almost guaranteed to be much higher than that now. Think about how many total businesses there are in the world. You want to stand out in the crowd? Currently, there's less than 10 companies that have an ISO 42001 credential. You want to stand out? You want to be something special? You want to be that one person that's seen, in this field, this sea of wannabe AI companies? Get this credential. I feel strongly about this because in 2003, this is my first company. Between 2003 and 2013, I screwed up. I stepped on a lot of landmines. I had to learn a lot of stuff. But the last thing that I learned before I just took off was the fact that I had zero credibility. I had zero corporate credentials to prove that I could deliver. That made me low risk in the eyes of potential customers. Once I figured that out in 2013, and I got ISO certified and CMMI appraised during 2013 and then in the first month of 2014. But once I did that, I went from having won $15 million in contracts all the way up to nearly $400 million before I sold my company in 2016. 3 years later. 3 years later, I won nearly $400 million contract in 3 years. Had I learned that lesson a lot earlier, I would have started up that vertical part of my growth curve then. If you're a small business, or even if you're a mid-sized business, it's very difficult for you to stand out because you don't have those large proven past performances. I created the ISO certification group, and we offer this credential, this ISO, certified compliant with the ISO 42001 AI management system standard. This is how we do it. We've helped hundreds of customers in the past. We have 100% client credentialing success record, 100%. Nobody has ever failed an audit with us. And the reason why is because we give you a full set of ISO compliant documents. We give it to you. We don't tell you to create yourself. We don't, and then come back months later and say, oh, wow, this kind of still sucks. Redo it again. We don't do that. We give you stuff that works. You have basically it's a how-to manual of how to implement AI systems. So we give that to you because we know it's compliant. We know it works. We also go one step further than 99.999% of all other, companies like us. And that is we provide you sample records. So, what are sample records? Well, when you go through an ISO audit, they need to know that you've got a program that's compliant with the standards. Those are your processes, your procedures, your manuals, and all that kind of stuff. But they also have to prove that you're using it. So, for example, when you follow a process, 9 times out of 10, it will create an artifact or what's called a record, that needs to be audited by the auditor to prove that you're actually following your own program. So what we do is we give you example records. If you're committed, you're willing to put a little bit of work in there, be a little bit flexible, we can do this in weeks. For 22.5, I'm able to give you 2 ISO certifications, ISO 9001 and ISO 42001. And people always say, well, what if I don't want ISO 9001? I'm thinking, well, you're going to be compliant with it, whether or not you want to take credit for it or not. So, and the reason why that is because ISO 9001 requirements are about half of every other certification's requirements. Plus, I also throw in, if it's applicable to you and it's applicable to every company I've ever met, if you ever want to sell to the world's largest customer, which is the U.S. federal government, then my Government Contracting Academy's Advanced GovCon training program is 100% relevant. And that's a $10,000 value. That's what I sell it for. Now, people are going to look at that price and they say, oh my God, that's so expensive, Randy. Well, Google it. The total cost, now you got to say in total cost now because I include the documents, the training, the audit prep, the internal audit, and the actual audit itself, processing fees, administrative management fees, all of that is incorporated in that. So this is what Google's going to say. It's going to cost you somewhere between $7,000 and $50,000 plus just for ISO 9001 alone. And trust me, that's the cheap one. Every certification body offers ISO 9001, supply and demand. There's only a handful in the world accredited certification bodies that can offer the ISO 42001. In 2013, when I got my first ISO 9001 certification, 2013, that's over a decade ago, it cost me total cost $25,000. $25,000 total cost. So for less than what I paid to get ISO 9001, over a decade ago, you not only get that same ISO certification, but you also get the hottest one that's going to be coming out on the market, which is the certified compliant with the ISO 42001 standard, plus the $10,000 government contracting training program that has literally thousands of downloads, sample proposals, sample capability statements, sample offer letter. Our goal in Government Contracting Academy is to never have you start with a blank sheet of paper. We give you a starting point for everything, in addition to the training. I think it's probably the best investment in the world right now. My youngest son is launching a company, and guess what certifications he's getting? He's getting these 2 right here. And guess how much it's costing? I'm the dad, so I'm putting this up. Guess how much this is costing us? That price right there. So I am 100%, trying to be transparent with what I'm doing here.